It is July 16th, 2025, and Israel is bombing Damascus in what U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is referring to as some sort of misunderstanding between the Al-Qaeda HTS government in Syria and Israel. But what is really happening here? As you have Israel acting as though it's just acting on behalf of the Druze minorities in southern Syria, and you have al-Julani's forces acting as though they're just intervening to stop these clashes between minorities in the region. What is the bigger picture here, and what should we be keeping an eye on? Well, that's what we discussed with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Laith Marouf, a Palestinian-Syrian journalist and host of Free Palestine TV based in Lebanon. Laith, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Good to be with you, Rachel.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. We have the Associated Press reporting that the Al-Qaeda government in Syria and the Druze minorities have reached a new ceasefire agreement after days of clashes. I know that there's also been some pushback on that, so it's not clear exactly what has been agreed to or if there even is an agreement. But this does come after Israel carried out strikes earlier today, which it claimed were in support of the Druze, targeting Damascus and even bombing the entrance of the Syrian military headquarters. Can you start by taking us through what we need to know about this specific conflict, as it's being presented as if you've got al-Julani's forces and Israel just coming in and helping out these clashing minorities in southern Syria?
Yeah, so for those who don't understand the history of Syria and the geography, uh, the Druze population in south of Syria in the Sueda region, which means the blackened area, by the way. If you look at it, those satellite images, you'll see a volcano there that had exploded millions of years ago, and all this black rock that spans the south of Syria and the north of Jordan. This area has been historically very crucial to the formation of the state of Syria and or revolts against foreign occupations. So when we look at the Syrian revolution against French occupation, it started from Sueda, led by the leader at the time of the Druze population, Sultan al-Atrash, along with Alawi leaders in the coast and Sunni Bedouin leaders in Deir ez-Zor. Those three regions are what moves Syria, not the capital Damascus and or the economic capital Aleppo. Those sides of Syria are what moves it in the revolutionary thought. And then what we saw over the last number one 15 years of war in Syria is taking out the whole northeast of Syria and Deir ez-Zor, kind of uh, you know um, destroying the ability of Deir ez-Zor to be one of the pillars of the nation. And then we saw, since January and the fall of the Assad regime government, the destruction of the Alawite population and their power base in the coast. And now what's left is the Druze in Sueda. So the attacks by HTS over the last week were designed to bring the Druze population in Sueda into down to heel, and they failed. HTS failed. So now what we see is the Israelis taking understanding that HTS can govern Syria without control of Sueda, entering themselves into the formula and attacking HTS and attacking the whatever is left of what could be a state of Syria, like the Ministry of Defense and the presidential palace in Damascus, making sure that if HTS government falls and these Wahhabi death squads cannot govern Damascus and Syria, then nobody else can have the institutions to govern Syria if they succeed in leading a revolution against the Wahhabi control of Damascus.
Okay. And I appreciate that explanation there because I know that even right now it seems like US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is a little bit confused here as to what's going on as he's claiming there seems to be a misunderstanding. What he's really saying is that Israel and HTS, they're supposed to be on the same side. And as you're noting there, they are on the same side, and that is against the people of Syria ultimately not wanting anyone else, any kind of actual legitimate government to form. And when it comes to Israel's kind of broader plan here, because I know that, it's being reported in the West that, oh, Israel is targeting al-Julani's government somehow. But when it comes to this want for, the southern portion of Syria and kind of those bigger aims there where Israel's just hopping on board and saying, hey, we're just helping out the Druze. How do you see those kind of long-term plans that Israel is trying to put into place even now?
Yeah, we heard just one of the Israeli generals an hour ago saying that their intervention in the south of Syria is not only about destroying HTS, but to occupy the whole of south of Syria up to Suwaida and to make it part of Israel, openly saying this. Now, this is probably daydreams because the Israeli military is exhausted. Specifically, their ground forces are depleted, they're demoralized, they haven't been able to occupy Gaza, and they have huge casualties and maimed and injured numbers. So, to occupy the south of Syria, which is, uh, you know, probably the half of the size of what Israel is now as a state, is impossible with this ground forces. They can dream about it, but they can't achieve it. When we look at what the Israelis and the United States have put as options for them in Syria, we look at the option that they were trying for the last few months, which is to get HTS to control the country and to have a quote unquote peace deal with the Zionist colony and to join the Abrahamic Accord or the new Abrahamic religion that they're trying to make up. And the latest indications of that was those meetings in Azerbaijan between the Syrian government, the new government of HTS, and the Israelis, as well as the meetings that we just saw in Europe that happened, that included some of the Arabic governments and European governments to talk about what's happening in Palestine. And but the problem for the Israelis is that HTS doesn't really control the ground, and they're attempted. There's not enough of these Wahhabi death squads to control the country, and the majority of Syrians don't see them as legitimate, no matter which background they come from. So they have now a backup plan, at least two backup plans. One of them is this occupation and breakup of Syria, the south of Syria specifically, and maybe even the coast. Another option is the new flag that everybody is looking at of Syria is actually the flag of the Hashemite kingdom of Syria that lasted a few years after World War I, when the Hashemite family was installed to control Jordan, Palestine, Syria, and Iraq. And that's the other possibility, that the Americans have seen that these installed quote unquote royal families in the Arabic world have been the most loyal and the most successful at suppressing their own population's opinions for the last 100 years. None of the vassal republics in the Arabic world that are not really democracies were able to last as well as these, absolute monarchies like in Jordan and the Gulf countries. And maybe the Americans would want to bring back, and that's where we heard Barak, the envoy of Trump last week, hint to the reunification of Lebanon and Syria, like under that flag of the Hashemite kingdom of Syria that lasted just a few years after World War I.
Wow, that is so interesting. And you're seeing the US in this position of knowing what it works best with and what it can quote unquote control, out at the same time claiming that they want freedom and democracy, right? And then they turn right back around and they're like, actually, if you had some sort of a kingdom, say some sort of a dictator in place that we could control, we would really prefer that. Now, as the US and Israel are doing all of this and continuing on with their terror in the region, I know that there are a lot of concerns for the overall minorities in Syria, because as you know, we see the ongoing clashes that have happened with this new Al-Qaeda HTS government in Damascus, the way that they have targeted these minorities. And we also know that there's been a lot of talk about wanting to break up Syria, wanting it to get to the point where all of these different minorities are clashing with each other. What are your concerns about that being kind of an eventual plan if the US and Israel fail and having any kind of central, quote unquote, I don't even want to call it a government, but a version of a government in Damascus that is able to keep some form of control?
Yeah, I mean, the effects of those massacres that are being committed against the minorities, the Shia, the Alawites, the Christians, and now the Druze, are reverberating throughout the whole region. So we saw just earlier today the Syrian Druze of the occupied Golan Heights break the fences with Syria and rush in with machine guns and pickup trucks into the southern parts of Syria, reaching all the way to Sueda and to the Germana suburb of southern Damascus, where there's a big Syrian Druze population that are refugees from the Golan Heights and the war and occupation in 1967. So that shows you how it's destabilizing even Zionist control of the occupied Golan Heights, the effects of that. Here in Lebanon, we saw over the last 2 days calls for militias to be formed by the Druze Lebanese population and to cross the border and confront the HTS fighters and to try to reach Sueda and the Germana neighborhood again in Damascus to give aid. So there is a whole regional effects to this, and those words of Barak that I referred to about al-Julani taking over Syria actually reopened the possibilities in the minds of the people in Lebanon and Syria for reunification that people have been trying to do since the World War I, and it's the West that stood against it. And to come out of the mouth of the envoy of the West that Syria could be reunified, well, people can reunify it under a democratic, revolutionary leadership, not a Wahhabi leadership. Now that's a reality on the ground. And all of these forced movements of people, as we saw those Alawi and Shia and Christian Syrians that crossed into Lebanon, maybe a million of them over the last 7 months. This is, again, reintegrating these populations in Lebanon and within their larger family connections that have been chopped up since World War II and I. So there's now the upheaval that the United States is creating through these massacres in hopes to create uh, pure states that represent certain sects on the to legitimize the existence of a pure supremacist Jewish state. You need to have the whole neighborhood to look like it. This is what the US is trying to do. Well, this is actually working the opposite of what the United States wants. It's opening imagination in people's minds, and people are crossing the borders that the US bashed themselves. The US destroyed these borders. And now we have a chance to redraw Psychos Pico, not by fracturing the countries as the US wants, but to reimagine unification.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that I hope that the people there are keeping in mind, right? Seeing exactly what the US wants and realizing, hey, we can push for the opposite of that. And also at the same time, keeping in mind the Palestinians, right? The civilians of Lebanon, all of these people who Israel is openly targeting, and remembering that the US and Israel will do that to anybody. It will not just stop there. And, kind of taking into account what you were mentioning earlier about the state that Israel is in. I know we've talked last week about the attacks that were being carried out by Hamas targeting the IDF. You've got Israel right now carrying out bombings in Lebanon, Syria, still continuing on with the genocide against the Palestinians. Oh, and then they also still want war with Iran. As all of this is happening, you also have Netanyahu dealing with the Knesset falling apart, and then he's dealing with his corruption trial. I know there's some back and forth on where that stands at the moment, but how do you view the current position that Israel is in, and really this place of trying to carry out more death and destruction to distract from what's happening at home, and yet that just hurts them more at home in the long run?
Yeah, I mean, they have two paths forward in front of them. The Zionists have always been since October 7th. It's either accept, defeat and begin dismantling apartheid and build a coexistence, and or attempt to genocide anyone and everybody that refuses your supremacy. There's no third way for them, right? And as we see, every time it gets close to the ceasefires being called, the Zionists get the cold feet because they know if they stop, then the comeuppance for everybody is gonna, happen. And so they Netanyahu and everybody in charge in the Zionist colony, and now as we see more so, even the leadership in the Western countries are too scared to stop this war because everybody that aided and abated this genocide will have to, answer to their crimes. All the energy that we see people putting into stopping the genocide will be diverted into putting everybody that was responsible for this genocide behind bars. That's what's going to happen naturally. And people will fight for that. And so, where are we going here? We look at how every time we are close to a stoppage in the genocide in Gaza, a new front is open. And the latest one of them is being Syria again. And can they achieve any victories in Syria? Well, they haven't achieved any victories in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iran. How can they achieve any victory in Syria? It's impossible. And the more they stretch themselves with this strategy of running forward away from your failures, the more ready they are for collapse.
Yeah, it's very telling, and I think that the US needs to pay a little bit more attention to what it's getting itself into as it continues on in this path of the ongoing genocide of the Palestinians, but also this just regional war, and watches the way in which, exactly as you're saying, Israel keeps pushing to expand, and the US keeps expanding on its end. Certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I always appreciate you taking the time to join me here to break down all of the latest. Laith Marouf, a Palestinian-Syrian journalist and host of Free Palestine TV, thank you so much for your time and insight.
See you soon.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. You can also check out Sanction over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.